Thank you for joining us for today's program on cucurbits. Herman, over to you.
Thank you. The first thing that I want to say is sometimes when I do these programs, what I do is I look at what questions come into the extension office. And if you take those questions that people are asking, the next generation, the people next year are going to be asking the same questions. So if you come up with a program and answer those questions, it's going to be beneficial to the public. The main thing that I'm going to concentrate on is cucumbers and the summer squash. The summer squash. Okay. Let me get in here. Okay. I want to say that in your garden or orchard, there is no right or wrong. It is what works best for you, because all of us do things a little bit different. Okay. This is a chart that I had to kind of develop because I could find some that were close. And what this is that when I said I was going to talk about cucurbit, what I didn't realize is I would have to go back and cover the Cucurbitaceae, I believe it is, pronunciation, which is a family that has all of our pumpkins, squash, cantaloupe, and watermelons in it. Okay, and they're all not really closely related either. So if you look at the top line all the way across, the cucurba, the peepo, and then you get into the jack-o'-lantern pumpkin, the field pumpkins, acorn and table squash, vegetables. You get the zucchini, yellow scrickneck, and the scallop or the patty pan that we like. That's in one species, okay? And then when you get down to the muscata, there's your butternut squash and some of your other pumpkins and cushaws. Then you get to the maxima, which has in there some of your other, like the Hubbard, which is a large squash, and then you get the Big Mac pumpkin in there. And then if you go on further down, you get that green striped cushaw and the white cushaw and white pumpkins. Okay. And then there is the loofah, which is the dish rag gourd. Then if you get further down, what you find out is the cucumis. There's the mellow, which includes cantaloupe, muskmelon, the honeydew, the crenshaw, and some of those lighter color skin fruit. Then when you get into Stavia, let's see, you get into the cucumbers, all types of cucumbers. And then if you go back up to the genus of the vulgaris, there is your watermelons, all types of watermelons. But we're not going to cover all of this. We're going to cover the part that I think most of us are going to want to watch or know about. Okay. First of all, we want to talk about the pH of the soil on this particular group of fruit. The muskmelon and cantaloupe, and in Texas, some of the authors of some of the books say they are muskmelons in Texas, the cantaloupe elsewhere. Okay. So the pH that we're talking about, we're going to go a pH of about 6 to 8 on cantaloupe. One of the things this really does is if you're trying to grow commercially and you have a soil pH of down to 6 to 5, but you have a pH as high as 8, that means you may want to concentrate on growing that muskmelon that does well in that particular pH. The summer squash is around from 6 to 7.5 on its pH. Now the pumpkins will go from a 5.5 to a 7.5 on that pH range. The cucumbers are 5.5 to about a 7. Okay. And then the watermelons will go down to a 5.5 to a 6.5. Okay. That is the pH range that they'll do the best in. But we're not going to let that pH range stop us from doing what we want to do. A lot of people don't think about the roots of our plants. The cucurbit roots in this particular slide, the summer squash, their roots are going to go about 8 foot deep in ideal soil conditions. The cucumbers are around 5 foot deep, and the melons are around 6 feet deep. Here again, that's under ideal conditions. In Nebraska, where the soil is very, very deep and loose, there was a study done. And on a white spine cucumber, the root system at about 4 weeks old is 4 feet wide, 2.5 feet deep. That's 30 inches deep. One of the things I like to use this for is to show that when you buy a cucumber plant already growing in a container from the store, and it's 2.5, 3 inches tall, or the root system is that deep, what you need to look at, if that plant was 4 weeks old, the root system on the taproot needs to be about 2.5 feet deep. So where is the rest of your root system? In many cases, it's better to wait and plant a week or two later in the soil and get all that root system that that plant really needs and deserves so it can really make a large prolific vine. Here again is one 6 weeks old, and the depth is over 4 foot deep. So an inch per day plus on these cucumbers is normal. But in our area, in the soil, we may not have that luxury because of that heavy soil and then caliche right under it. This is a surface view of that same cucumber at 6 weeks old. It covers an area about 9 by 9 feet. That's the top 8 inches of the soil. This doesn't show anything that's below that. This is a cucumber in the spring, and it just so happens that it's been laying on soil that's fairly moist. If you look, the node has rooted. The node has rooted, and you got roots here. This node here has also been rooted. One of the things I want to show about this and talk about is that on your squash should be able to do the same thing. And there might be times when you would like to have some of these nodes rooted further out there on that vine. You actually have basically another root system on the same plant. When we talk about the soil, the garden media, the growing media, it is a storehouse for nutrients. It supports and anchors the root system. We want organic matter and solids. We want air and water. If the organic matter and solids is 50%, ideally we would like to have about 25% air and 25% water. Now, if we have 50% water, that means there's no air. That means our roots are drowning. And that is important. We need moisture, but we want a balance. When some people start their gardening, they're going to go down here and they're going to purchase topsoil or use their own topsoil. But in the event of gardening mix or rose mix, it is sold by volume. There's a lot of wood chips in it. Those wood chips need to decompose. And the nitrogen in that material is going to be tied up by the wood chips so the wood chips can decompose. And at that time, most of that nitrogen is not available to your plants. So when you put this in your garden, you build your bed, and you put plants out there, they're not going to grow very well, and you're going to be disappointed. So you're going to have to supplement a lot of extra nitrogen. Now I'm talking about enough nitrogen where you think you're going to kill your plants. It takes a lot of nitrogen. Once you get that nitrogen in that soil and enough of it, your plants are going to start growing. Now, another thing about that garden mix, when you build that bed 12 inches high, and as the wood chips decompose, the volume in your bed will decrease. And next year, instead of having a 12-inch raised bed, you'll probably have about a 10-inch raised bed. Now, when the wood chips decompose, you now have compost. Now, there are some cases where, like my daughter this year, they want a pumpkin and a watermelon and they don't have the space. So what I have told them to do is you go in the garden and you dig up one little patch of ground, about an 8 by 8 inch square, water it real good, lay those seeds on top of the soil and cover them up with a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of sand or some light media so that it will germinate. Once it germinates and starts growing, you're going to have a vine that's growing or going to cover quite a bit of the yard. But for a 7-year-old or 6-year-old, this may be only one time. but it is an experiment and it is an education. That's actually considered a no-till garden, and there is such a thing out there. Soil preparation for an established garden. You want to remove the trash and weeds that harbor the insects around your garden. Most literature from A&M says you broadcast 2 to 3 pounds of complete fertilizer per 100 square feet, add some compost, a ½ inch or so, and you work it in. You want to turn it up till about, or till it till about 8 inches in depth. And then with adequate moisture and the right temperature of the soil, we're going to plant it. Cucurbit seed life, in most cases, is about 4 years plus. If you're in doubt about your seeds, you can do a germination test, which means you take a few of those seeds, like 10, put them in a paper towel, put them in a Ziploc bag with some moisture in there, not a lot of water, put it in a place with the right temperature, and you want to see how long it takes for that seed to germinate. If you have 6 out of 10, you have a 60% germination rate, which means you may have to add extra seeds when you plant these. I store some of these seeds in a sealed bottle with silica and refrigerate and freeze them at times for long, long life. Now, I have Johnny's seeds mentioned here, and why I have this here is because their magazines at the beginning of each particular vegetable give a lot of information on how to grow that particular fruit or vegetable. Very good information. The local seed stores have a display of seeds that are pretty good, and they are seeds that have done well in the area, and people keep coming back for the same seeds. Johnny's is a good place for some of those seeds. Rupp or UPP is a very good place. Burpee has seeds, and so has Wilhite. Now, there are other places, and this is only a few. And when you get into some of these catalogs, the selection is very, very broad. When it comes to the germination temperature of some of the things we're going to talk about, cucumber sprout from 60 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The muskmelon, cantaloupe, 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The pumpkin from 70 to 90 degrees. Squash, 70 to 95. Winter squash, 70 to 80. And the watermelon, 70 to 95. Now, we know that nature is very forgiving, and we might be able to get by with variations of this. When you look at days to harvest, the summer squash, it takes 39 days. Now, if you look at some of the old catalogs, you'll find out that years ago, a summer squash would produce in maybe 55 days. So the breeders have developed fruit and vegetables that were produced in shorter periods of time. So that's something else to think about. This is an example of cucumber seeds. At 50 degrees Fahrenheit, all seeds fail to sprout. At 59 degrees, 95% of them sprout in 13 days. At 68 degrees Fahrenheit, 98% sprout in 6 days. 77 Fahrenheit, 99% sprout in 4 days. And at 86, you have 3 days, and 95, you have 3 days. So sometimes it might be better to wait till the soil temperature gets to where we want it to be. There have been times when I wanted to plant some cucumbers and the soil was too cool. What I would do is I would dig a concave hole in the soil. I would plant the seeds. I would take chicken wire over the top of it and put clear plastic and seal it and make like a greenhouse. The sunlight penetrating the plastic raises the temperature of the soil, and the seeds germinate and sprout. That has worked for me. Now, when it comes to cucumber sprouting, Sometimes we have to plant in soil that's pretty rough, clods. So what I do at that point, I will open, the ground is worked, I will open the soil. At the bottom of that little trench, I will wet it real good so there's adequate moisture there. I will lay the seeds down. I will cover it with sand or a media that is very fine so those seeds will break through real easy. I will pack the sand or whatever's on top so that the seeds are in good contact with the moisture. And then they'll sprout. I have planted some seeds where the temperature of the soil was extremely hot or warm. And what I would do is I would do something similar to this. And when I got through with it, I would give it some midday shade. I would shade the area where those seeds are from 10 in the morning till about 3 in the afternoon. Once the seeds germinated and broke the soil, I would then remove the shade. Now, in a lot of our gardens, we have only a small number of plants. And there is a cutworm out there in a lot of our gardens that will cut that plant to the ground, and we don't want to do that. In this case right here, the photo you're looking at is a pepper plant. There's one toothpick beside it. That toothpick is there because the cutworm has to get around the plant in order to cut it off. So if we've got 3 cucumber plants, each one of them is very valuable to us, and we can do that. Or if you're like me, I want to make sure. So I will put 2 toothpicks there. Some people use nails, anything that you can find that acts like a physical barrier so that that worm cannot cut that plant off. When you pay $2 or $3 for a plant, you don't want to have to go back and get another one. There might not be any left. I don't think chemical control will work on this real well. BT will kill that particular worm, but it's not fast enough. So the physical barrier, some people will use a tissue roll, anything to prevent that worm from killing. That plant. Now that we got our cucumbers up, if you look over here further, you see how close they are? Well, we need to thin those. Now, let's take a pair of scissors or something, and we're not going to pull them up because we don't want to disturb the roots that are in the ground that we're going to leave for the other plants. So we're going to cut out with the scissors what we want to keep. These right here have already been thinned and cut out. Now, when they get ready to start to run, and you'll see that vine start to come up and lay over, that's when you would like to come out here, probably about 8 inches from the plants. Dig a trench about 1 inch deep. We don't want it deeper than 1 inch deep because a lot of these feeder roots are going to start about 1 inch from the top of the soil. But we're going to dig that little trench. We're going to take maybe a tablespoon of complete fertilizer. We're going to spread it all the way around that little trench. We're going to cover it up, and then we're going to water it in. And when that thing lays down and starts to vine, it's going to do very well, or should do very well. When it comes to the cucurbits, we're going to talk about pollination. The monoecious plants, most of the plants in the cucurbit family are monoecious. They have male and female flowers. If you look on the right, this is a male flower that has probably looked like it's already been opened. And this is the female flower that has not opened yet. So if this were left on the vine, tomorrow morning when this one opened, and then a new male flower opened, then we could use it, or the bees can move the pollen from the male to the female. If the pollen is not moved, or if this does not receive that pollen, this is not going to set and it will decompose or rot right there. A lot of rain has an impact on pollination. Sometimes on your squash or other plants, you may get female flowers only for a week or so. Then you may get male flowers, and then eventually you'll get both. What I tell people is if you have all female flowers and you need a male flower, I'd look in my neighbor's garden and see if he's got a male flower, and I would rob that male flower and use it to pollinate my female squash. Okay, the next slide up or photograph is, here's the female and here's the male. On the male, part of the petals have been stripped back so that you can see the inside. There's a little ball there with pollen on it, and there'll be pollen laying on the inside of that flower also. And that's what we need. Now, this is exactly what we hope happens. That female flower, the morning that the petal opens, we want the pollen from the male flower that opened to be distributed on the end of that female. Once that is pollinated, then your fruit should go ahead and develop. Now, this is the male bloom on the left. If you look, you see all this pollen here and in here. This is, see, there's no fruit back here. This is the male. See all this pollen in here? Bees or you can deliver this pollen to the inside of the female. The female bloom on the end like this is not a ball. It's like it tries to break or split in 3 parts. Sometimes we might want to use a brush. I've used a brush before, and I found out that some brushes, the material that they're made out of, the pollen will not stick to. So this particular brush right here, the pollen sticks to very well. So instead of pulling that male flower and using it, I can go in there and get the pollen on the brush and go to the female flowers and pollinate them. I would like to do this mid-morning, somewhere between probably about 8 and 11 or somewhere in there, okay? Now, that is the monoecious variety. And we're going to talk about gynoecious, which there is cucumbers and pickles that are gynoecious. If you look at this particular vine, wherever node is, there is a pickle or a cucumber. This is literally a cucumber plant. Now, when these make, and they are, if you have a full-size cucumber and you have on the other end of the vine one blooming and you pick it up, you will have every stage of that cucumber or every size hanging on that particular limb. Okay? There are gynoecious cucumbers and pickles. When you purchase a gynoecious variety of cucumber or pickle, 10% of the seeds in your container are of a monoecious variety, one that has male and female flowers. Because what you want is that monoecious plant, that male flower, is going to be used to pollinate the gynoecious pickled cucumbers. In a small garden, like many of us have, if we plant 6 seeds of the gynoecious variety, what's the possibility of all of the 4 plants or 6 plants being gynoecious, meaning there are no male blooms? Now, in my garden, what I do quite often when I plant only a few, the gynoecious variety, I will also plant a hill next to it of a monoecious variety, a pollinator like straight 8, because it makes male and female flowers. Now, on the gynoecious variety, there are times when stress may produce all male blooms. Excess moisture or too dry is stressful, and that's when that might happen. Under good ideal conditions, the yield of the gynoecious varieties is very, very large. Literally a cucumber plant. And then we have another variety out there, which is Parthenocarpic. That's the hothouse cucumber. No pollinator is needed. So if you grow them in a greenhouse, or in the fall in the garden and you have no bees like at my place, then the Parthenocarpic variety or the greenhouse type would be very be a wise choice. Okay. On the Parthenocarpic, pollination reduces the quality like it may have seeds. They can tolerate and produce at lower temperatures in the fall and in a greenhouse. Now, the seed catalog RUPP, what I did is I went there and looked 100 of these Parthenocarpic seeds. You can get 100 of them for $14. Or there's another variety you can get 100 seeds for $145. So that tells you there's a difference there in the two varieties. The cucumber originated in India. We talked about the pH of 5.5 to 7. In all cases, we're going to add 2 to 3 pounds of complete fertilizer per 100 square feet. We're going to till it in, and we're going to plant at the right depth. In cucumbers, we're going to plant it each an inch deep or maybe shallower. We want a soil temperature of 60 to 75. They're going to sprout in about 7 days. In the row, if you're planting rows, you want these seeds to be about 18 inches down the row apart. The rows, you want them about 36 inches apart. In our case, most of us, we're going to do a raised bed or a container. And in that raised bed, if you will put up a fence or tomato cages, it'll go up and you can produce more in a smaller space. And if you look at the sides of backyards now in the new houses, we're all going to be looking for smaller spaces. Okay. When it comes to the cucumber varieties, the Gynoecious variety that have female blooms only, there's Comet 2, Dasher 2, and some other varieties. Okay. I am familiar with the Dasher 2 and I have used it before. The monoecious variety that have male and female blooms, some of these are the Burpee Hybrid 2, Bushwhopper, Slice Master, and the Straight 8, which is an old variety, which I remember planting as a kid. It's open pollinated heirloom variety. These are usually called slicers because these are the ones you peel and slice. One thing to remember about these though, seed size and the skin thickness. When it comes to pickle varieties, we have Gynoecious, and some of these are Calypso, which is a hybrid. It produces in 52 days. The Carolina is a hybrid, which produces in 55 days. Now, here again, how many of the seeds do you plant out of this that have male blooms? The monoecious variety that has male and female blooms. The Eureka is a hybrid that produces in 57 days. A homemade is 55, and the national pickle is 57 days. This is an heirloom variety here also. When it comes to cucumbers, and we grow them, and sooner or later we decide we like this one better than that one. So we want to consider flavor, the skin thickness. Does the color mean anything to you? How about seed size, texture, and is it crisp? Now, the advantage of raising cucumbers in your own garden, you can pick what you want when you want to. This cucumber doesn't have to get to be 8 inches. If you want it at 6 inches and that's where your taste buds are, that's what we're going to do. Now, when it comes to pickles normally up to about 4.5 inches is the maximum length. They can get some pretty good diameter on them. Color, if you notice, the skin thickness is thinner on these than on the slicers. So that means you may not want to peel them. Then we come to seed size, crisp, and flavor. I notice there's a lot of people that instead of raising cucumbers now because of flavor and crisp, they're raising pickles. Then we get into the spine color. These are spines. Look like little thorns or stickers on them. They're white and they are black. Okay. And then sometimes a cucumber gets away from us and it gets big and yellow. If it is a hybrid, you just go ahead and give it to kids with some toothpicks and let them be creative. Okay. If it is an open pollinated variety like Straight 8, and you don't have another variety to cross with that's close to it, you can actually, when this gets very, very yellow, you can actually save the seeds and dry them and use those seeds later on. Most of us are not saving seeds anymore. We just go out and buy what we want. Then when it comes time to harvest, we want to harvest them when they're at the peak at what we want. This happens to be Dasher 2 on the left, which is a gynoecious variety. The Orient Express, this is one that Jackie liked. I don't even know what it is other than that. And then the Carolina Hybrid, which is a gynoecious variety also. But this is just an example of what is out there. In an old garden, I used to have some fences. I had 4 fences. I grew cucumbers on one fence and cantaloupe on the other. The flavor's good in both of them. Now, I'm not going to say any more on that right yet. Okay, but you don't have to worry about cross-pollination. And also, I'm using hybrid seeds, which means I'm not going to keep any of those seeds for the future. On our cucumbers and our squash, one of our problems is going to be the cucumber beetles. There are striped cucumber beetles, which means these 12 dots will be going straight down the back, and you'll have 4 stripes. Or you can have banded, which means these 4 spots here can be connected crossways across the back, or you can have the 12 spotted cucumber beetle. All of them are going to eat you plants, blooms, stems, and leaves of the cucumbers. Also squash, pumpkins, and melons. So we want to get rid of these early. In that small garden, you can probably catch them and mash them with your finger. If not, you could use 7-malathion, or there are some new chemicals out that are very well, that are actually organic. Okay? These things can spread diseases through your plants. The larvae of this plant, of this beetle, is the corn rootworm. Now we have the melonworm moth. If you look, this is the most beautiful moth I've ever seen. It has what they consider as an anal tuft. When you look at them, it looks like a very sleek, modern aircraft. The larvae, they go in and they lay their eggs hatch. The larvae prefer the foliage of cucumber, melons, pumpkins, and squash. They may not be early in the spring, but later on, and even in August, these melon worms will hatch. BT will control them. I've seen a lot of them in September, and then more moths would come in. And in October, there were still these melon worms on the plants. Now, this right here, if you look at the black arrows, those are eggs of the melonworm moth. The caterpillar, this is the caterpillar right here, and if you look at the webbing here, this is getting ready to produce this cocoon. They like the new growth, especially toward the tip of the plant. If you're going to use BT, you want to spray very well, very good coverage, and concentrate it on the tip also. You want to spray top and bottom of the leaves, and BT works very well. Okay. These are the tendrils that are going to secure a lot of our cucumbers to the fence or whatever. They wrap around and cling to any kind of support that they can. This right here where the new growth is, that's the target of the melonworm moth in many cases. That's the new growth. Now there's also what you call a pickleworm moth. The larva of the pickleworm feeds on stems, blossoms, fruit of cucumbers, gourds, melons, and squash. So we're going to have to take this into consideration also. The damage is about the same as the melonworm, but a little more dramatic. This plant right here has been stripped because of the melonworm and the pickleworm. Here again, BT works. And this is a cucumber. There's a hole in there. And we're going to open that hole up, and we're going to find out what that pickleworm looks like. here is the pickle worm. And if you can look real careful, you put this under a magnifying glass, what you'll find out is there's going to be some little black spots in here, but this is a young pickle worm. Those black spots haven't developed yet, but you can see where they're coming from, okay? Now, this is a photograph that I had to get off the internet. This is a more mature pickle worm. So when you see these, you know what they are. Now, I mentioned BT, Bacillus Thuringiensis, several times. It's excellent control for caterpillars. There is the order of Lepidoptera, which is moths and butterflies, in that Lepidoptera order. When these butterflies and moths lay eggs, when they hatch, a caterpillar is there. And we want to get rid of him. This also includes the tomato hornworm and the cabbage loopers. Now, sunlight degrades BT, so we're going to spray it at dark so that we get as much use out of it as we can. When these caterpillars eat the BT, they stop eating almost immediately and they die from dehydration. This chemical or bacteria on those plants is probably going to be active for about 3 days, depending upon sunlight. When I use it, I put about a teaspoon of ivory as a surfactant in a gallon of water. The shelf life of this material in the containers is 2 to 3 years, and they also produce a liquid and a dust. The trade names in a lot of cases are Thuricide, Dipel, Bioworm Killer, and there's others out there. Now, I found some small tomato hornworms on a tomato plant one time. I got rid of them by mashing them. The next day, there were more there. So what I did that morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, I took a sprayer that was already mixed up and it had been sitting in the garage for 20 days. I sprayed those hornworms, little hornworms about a ½ inch long, sprayed them at 7 o'clock in the morning. I went back at 10 o'clock. They were not eating. They died from dehydration. What I want to show you is most of the time on chemicals, we tell you when you mix it, you spray it and then get rid of it. This was an accident, but the accident proves to work. There's also Spinosad out there that works for borers, bagworms, leaf miners, beetles, thrips, and tent caterpillars. It also seems to keep killing for about 4 weeks. I'm not familiar with it, and it also is considered organic. Read the label. That's the most important thing you can do. Now, all of this, there's got to be some fun in there for the kids. So you take that cucumber that's already set fruit, and when it's still able to stick in that bottle, you put it in the bottle, you hang it up there, and it grows. The next thing you know, you end up with a bottle that has a cucumber in it. Now, you give that to your kids, they take it to school, and they are the hit of the class because everybody's asking them, how did they do that? When it comes to cucumbers, we want to harvest them probably daily. We want to inspect. We want to look at the leaves every day. We would like to harvest them in the morning when the leaves are dry, hopefully the cool of the day if there's any such thing. If you have cucumbers that are running on the ground, what you can do is take that vine and kind of grab a handful of a vine, kind of pick it up, and what you'll find out is in certain areas it'll weigh more. And wherever that heavy spot is where that cucumber is. When you get ready to harvest that cucumber, you want to get your hand around that cucumber or pickle, and you want to use your thumb to push this and break the stem from the cucumber. And like my father said, don't step on or break the vines. We want to cool them down to preserve that freshness, because if they lay on the counter too long, they're going to go back in the compost pile. Okay, we're going to get on summer squash right now. One of my favorites. Here again, the pH is 6 to 7.5. We're going to add that fertilizer, till it. We're going to plant our seeds by 1 to 2 inches deep at the right soil temperature. We're going to plant, and then we're going to thin these plants because we don't want them very thick. We want to water, and we want to make sure the weeds are gone. We're going to harvest them when they get to the size that we want, and we're going to determine over a period of time what size do we really want. What is the size of the seeds in this particular plant or fruit that I've harvested? I want smooth skin, and I like that kind of a creamy color on the skin. When that creamy skin color starts to turn yellow, I consider the straight neck yellow squash too large. I don't use krypneck. I don't usually plant krypneck. My daughter loves zucchini, and I've eaten patty pan as a kid with milk and cream and didn't care for it. Now, we want to monitor our squash for the squash bugs and the squash vine borer. When we plant these seeds, we have to have airflow, plenty airflow. We want plenty room. If this was the only hill of squash I had, and plenty room, I might let 3 of these grow. Other than that, I'm going to only let 2 of them grow. I want to side dress, mulch, and we're going to wait for the blooms. When the blooms appear, we want to make sure they are pollinated, and we may have to pollinate these. There might be times when you only have male or female, but you're waiting for that opposite. If you have females, you want that male bloom so you can do the pollination. Okay. Now, mildew, powdery mildew is going to be one of our problems. There are spots on the leaves and stems when the humidity is 50 to 90%. It's probably going to be there. 60 to 80 degrees temperatures, it's favorable for that. Okay. Now, it is moved by the wind, insects, animals, people, and water. As we go down and we harvest things and there's moisture on the leaves, we can be moving this fungicide or whatever down the road. On powdery mildew, you could use fungicide. I think Daconil and Captan is cleared for it. There may be others by now. Now, there was an agent in the Carolinas that he controlled powdery mildew by using milk. 1 part milk, 10 parts water, mixed and sprayed only on the leaves. I've tried it. It works. What I see is that after you spray this and you go back, what you see on the leaf is like there is a thin, transparent layer of something there that's protecting the leaf. I've done it more than once. I think that is effective. Try it. Do your documentation on it. Now, the powdery mildew resistant variety that I use is called Midas 2. I actually get it from Wilhite. Some of your seed catalogs don't show that they're powdery mildew resistant, but one of them does a very good job of showing you plants that are resistant to certain diseases and things. Now, one time I planted some squash, and I'm going to be smart. So I got my squash grower and I put a screen wire cage over them to prevent the squash vine borer from attacking the plants. But I kept the humidity, the humidity stayed very high. It's kind of warm. And look at those white leaves. That's powdery mildew. So I'm not going to do that again. Now, when it comes to mildew, we've got powdery mildew, which is fungal spots with a circular white appearance. The fungus can be anywhere on the surface of the leaf. The leaves yellow after fungus has been present for a while. Then we got the downy mildew. Fungal spots have an angular and gray appearance. Fungus is limited by leaf veins. The leaves may yellow before the presence of the fungus is even evident. Okay, even there. Now, Coniflorum, wet rot. It's a fungus. This is that squash that blooms out there, and the end turns black and you have the little white whisker like fungal growth on the blackened fruit. That happens when the temperature is between about 75 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit with wet weather. Short-lived, and there's really no control for it except plenty of air, plenty of room with good airflow. That means you might want to, if you're only going to raise a few plants, run them straight up a tomato cage to get them up off the ground. And if you're going to raise them up there, you might want to grow up and grow less plants and produce more from actually smaller plants. And sometimes that does happen. This plant is out there in the garden. This can be good and bad because when you get this high wind and it goes from one direction and whips back and forth, sometimes these plants will break off at the ground. A cage, a large cage, larger than a normal tomato cage, will work very well and support these. I have at time grown 2 plants up one cage, but it has to be a very large cage. Now, harvest quality. Sometimes we go out in the morning, we look at our squash and say, you know, that's really too small to pick. So I'll wait till tomorrow morning, and tomorrow morning is too big. So we should have picked it that afternoon. So sometimes twice a day picking your squash is the right thing to do. What I do when I harvested, here again, the moisture gone, I will grab the fruit and twist it till it breaks at the plant. I want that fruit to the size that I want and very tender. I do not want to break the plant because they are very brittle. Now, this plant on the right, that's a healthy plant one morning. And you go out there later in the afternoon and this is what it looks like. It's wilted down. Something is wrong. This is that squash grower's nightmare because he didn't know this was coming. Maybe. Okay, we're going to talk about the squash vine borer. I've seen these setting on the leaves of squash vines early in the AM. I didn't realize why they were there, but I now know why. Midday, about 11:30, and I have documented this many times, normally about 11:30 in the morning, if you're out there looking at your squash, you'll see these flying around. Okay, I'm going to compare these to a paper wasp. That's that wasp that's got that nest under the eaves of the house. That paper wasp is a fast flyer, and it'll go in and out of your squash plants and never stop and come out, but it's exceptionally fast. This moth, and this is a female, the male don't have this, they're not as dark as red or orange. This moth will go in and fly, and it looks like a helicopter that's loaded with hardware and can barely fly. It's a little slower. It will go in underneath your squash, and you're wondering where it went because it stopped. It's going to lay some eggs. There is literature that says this creates a noise when it flies, but I don't hear it. Okay. They lay singular eggs that will hatch in about a week. According to my documents at the house that I keep, I have seen them as early as the 8th of April and as late as the 24th of September. There's some literature that says a yellow cup of water acts like a trap to them. Now, this is what the seeds look like. This is on the stem underneath a leaf. Okay, they're going to hatch in about a week. Used to, A&M said, well, you take your 7 and you would spray the stalk from where the blooms were down to where it went into the ground. You know, I'm okay with chemicals, but that's pretty close to the squash that I'm going to eat. So I'm looking for another method. Okay. Now this is where if you have nodes that are rooted, that might keep the rest of the plant alive. It's just a thought. Now, when they hatch, they go down the stalk, they stem down to the stalk, and they're going to bore into the stem of that plant. Now, I've asked a lot of questions about this little worm. I had one extension agent that I consider very knowledgeable. And my question was, does this caterpillar eat on its way to bore into that plant? And he says yes. So that means if I spray BT underneath there, and if that little caterpillar consumes that BT, he's going to stop eating almost immediately. He should never get there. Okay. Now, some people, after they're in there, will take a needle and inject BT solution in there. And if he consumes the BT, he stops eating almost immediately. Some people will cut these vines open, take the worm out, cover it with moist soil, and then hope. Some people are using a silver metallic plastic mulch to lay down and plant their squash in there. And theoretically, what they're saying is that this confuses the moth and it does not know where to lay the eggs. So we see on this one where the borer has gone in. You can cut him out if you want to. Now, this is a worm. I have seen some of these where there'll be 5 or 6 worms in there at one time. They, according to literature, they feed for about 25 days. Then they will exit this plant, drop down into the soil 1 to 6 inches deep, and pupate. When that happens, we know we have started the next generation of moths. This now explains to me why I see the moths on top of that plant in the morning, because they have hatched. They've probably climbed up there and they're letting their wings dry. So if we and our neighbors have any of these vines that die, if we get rid of them immediately so that that worm never pupates, we should never have any more squash vine borers. Now, when you're looking at your garden or whatever, you don't need to look out there and get an idea of what it looks like. And after a while, you'll be able to look out there and say, oops, something's wrong there. And there is something wrong right here. And we've got leaf that's got some damage to the leaves. We got frass, which is caterpillar or worm droppings. Okay. So we need to find out why and what. Also, there's what you call a mosaic virus out there. If you look at this leaves here, they're disfigured. Okay. People and insects can move this virus through your row. When we find a plant that has the virus, we want to pull it up and put it in the trash. We do not want to compost it because most of our compost bins do not get hot enough to destroy the virus. Now, when you have these disfigured limbs, what you're probably going to have is squash that looks like it's partially green. This is the virus. Now, it's edible, but not for me. And then we want to look for squash bugs. They suck the juice from the leaves, stems, and of the cucurbit family. They prefer squash, but will feed on pumpkins. And that doesn't mean they're limited to that. When you crush these, they stink very bad. We want to control them early with malathion 7 or some other, whatever you work successful is successful for you. We want to get into the cantaloupe, the muskmelon. Here we know what the pH of the soil is. We're going to use our fertilizer. We're going to plant about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch deep. We want plenty of space for them. Your cantaloupe is going to produce probably anywhere from 3 to 8 fruit per plant. We want to control the vine if it's on the ground by turning the tips in the direction that we want it to grow. The names are interchangeable here, but like I said, in Texas, some of the people from A&M things, A&M says we have muskmelons, we don't have cantaloupe. They are andromoniosis, which means they have male, female flowers and a few perfect flowers that may occasionally set fruit. The ratio of blooms to fruit, or male to female, is 20 to 1. So you got 20 males and 1 female. They're open for only 1 day only. Pollen from Pollen from squash, cucumbers, and other vine crops will not pollinate or cause cantaloupe or muskmelon to set fruit. There are a lot of different varieties of muskmelon and cantaloupe. They can be smooth or netted. The cantaloupe or the muskmelon, and they have the honeydew, Crenshaw, mango melon, and there are some others that are different colors and different flavors that we might be interested in. My wife likes to call this a 10-pounder, but it's not quite. But this is a sugar queen. A lot of our cantaloupe are going to be anywhere from 3 pounds to 10 or 12 pounds. When I was a kid, I seen guys raise cantaloupe that looked like footballs, and they probably weighed close to 20 pounds or more. Okay, a cantaloupe I like to grow on a fence because I don't have a lot of room. I like my fence 90 degrees straight up. Now on cucumbers, a fence on an angle works real good because you can pick most of your cucumbers from the side where they're hanging. I like to control the weeds. I use a piece of carpet, pasteboard, or anything to control the weeds. Cantaloupe, when they start up the vine, they need a little bit of help, but not much. Cucumbers almost don't need any help. And your summer squash, they're going to need quite a bit of help, but once they get up that fence, they do pretty well. We want to water the ground, but we don't want to saturate it. So we water it well and then give it time to dry out. We support the fruit because a day or two before they're actually ripe, they will fall. And we don't want them to fall, break, split, or whatever. On the ground, it never fails. When they're about ripe, you get a rain and they rot. On the ground, varmints and birds are going to attack them. If you find on your cantaloupe and your other plants distorted or curled leaves, first thing you do is look for aphids, because the sooner you find them, the sooner you can control them, the better off you are. Now, okay, this is cantaloupe on a vine, and they're not quite ripe. This right here, if you look right here, the stem is attached very, very well because this is not ripe yet. However, over here, the stem has actually separated and we didn't have to do nothing. And this is considered as a vine ripe cantaloupe. I notice in the stores right now, they're not waiting for this to happen. They actually cut the stem, and they're maybe not the best there is, but they're pretty good anyhow. You know? So we want that vine to slip on the cantaloupe when we harvest it. Now this right here is Sugar Queen, there's Hales Bells, there's Ambrosia, and there's a lot of other cantaloupe or muskmelon out there, and you might want to select them by size, weight, how large is the seed cavity, and mainly, what is the flavor? My problem with ambrosia that I've raised before is I would find sometimes that half of the cantaloupe was sweet and the other half wasn't, and I didn't care for that. When it comes to the winter squash, here again, the soil pH matters, the fertilizer, you plant them about 1 inch deep at the right temperature, and we may have to give them a lot more room than we did some of our other plants. The one winter squash that I have planted quite a bit of and like real well is the butternut, which is the Waltham open pollinated variety. It is the largest butternut squash out there. It is somewhat resistant to the squash vine borer. And then the acorn squash is popular behind the butternut. Now, when I raise the butternut squash, what I have done is after your other plants are finished, like your beans and some of this, then I would plant from that time on all the way into August, the winter squash. I know I'm going to have aphids most likely, so I'm going to control them early. I will run them, I have run them on the ground, and I've used them on a fence. On a fence, they need a little help to start up. Some people, so I understand, like that winter butternut squash when it is small, immature. I've tried it, didn't care for it. Now, what we want to do is let these things grow to full size, And in the field, I've actually left them lay out there for weeks after the vines died. And then I would go cut them and leave about a 2-inch stem on them. If that stem is attached and that plant is not bruised or anything, that plant will last a long time. If you have bruised fruit, that you want to use that early, okay? Now, at our house, we have had butternut squash that laid on the counter in the kitchen from October the 15th to the 10th of April. Now, why does that happen? Okay, this is a butternut squash, Waltham butternut. It's been sliced in 3 parts. So you can see a third, and a third. You see how long that stem is out there? This is good looking. Now, what you want to take into consideration is the seed cavity, especially when you're buying them, okay? When you get ready to bake these, if you're going to bake them whole, be sure and poke a hole in them or they'll blow up in the oven. If you're going to peel them and boil them, use a potato peeler. A knife makes it impossible. You've got a small seed cavity. Now, these things will make a very good pumpkin pie filling. Don't tell nobody what it is, and they'll believe it's pumpkin. Now, soup and dessert are some people's favorite, and you can stuff them with meat or whatever. This is butternut squash on a fence. And if you notice, they've been left on the fence, and they're just curing out there, okay? And they're going to be there sometime, not in no hurry. And then we have the acorn squash that some people like. I'm not real familiar with it. I know it's out there. I've seen it, but I've never raised it for our family. And then if you take that butternut squash and you take a pocket knife and you scrape it, what you do is you get a coat of wax. That plant or that fruit is sealed in a coat of wax. So we're going to cure them 5 to 7 days or longer at 80 to 90 degrees in the field. Store them in a cool, dry place. And then 6 months later or whatever, we may have to throw them out. This is butternut squash. And you see the long stem, they kind of, I call it a gray looking bronze, but they work good. I love them. Aphids. Aphids, they suck sap from the plant. Okay. They're usually on the stems and new foliage. Now, find them early. So what you can do is you can wash them off with a water hose, high pressure water. They don't walk back. And I know on okra, I've used water, and then several days later, may go back and do it again, and it worked real well, just 2 water sprays. You can use malathion and others, but water for most of us is going to work very, very well. When it comes to the watermelon, we want a lower pH. We want the fertilizer. We're going to plant them about 1 inch deep. Now, we need a lot more space, 36 inches between rows and 144 inches apart in the rows. They are anti-carcinogenic. There's a compound there found in red flesh watermelons, lycopene. Okay. Now in the orange flesh, there's carotene. After they're harvested, they will last 2 to 3 weeks. We have round, long, dark green, light green, striped, many different colors. And there's a lot of different colored fruit out there now that we can use. If you have a watermelon and you got a white heart, that's probably too much fertilizer, but it also could be a combination of water also. And everybody asks, when is my watermelon ripe? On the package, it will probably say 90 days to harvest. So that means before 90 days, there's no reason to even go look. But now that you're after that 90 days or whatever it is, you go out there and you look for a dull looking melon, kind of flat dull. And we're going to thump it. And when you thump it, you'll have a flat thump or a sharp thump. The flat thump is the one you want. Then we're going to look at that brown curled tendril at the stem end. It should be black, dry. And then we're going to look at the belly and see if it's a cream color. And most watermelons, 45 days after pollination, they're ripe. But we're not going to stand there and watch when they're pollinated. So we have to go by these others. And if you've gone through enough fields, you'll know when to pick them and you'll know by thumping what is right. Now, I want to throw something else out here. When I was young, I worked behind a peanut thrashing machine, and the old man, must have been at least 45 years old, said that back during the Depression, they had all these watermelons and sweet potatoes, and they buried them in the side of these sandy hills. But I never heard when they pulled them out. One day at a Master Gardener event, I'm sitting by Dr. Ray, and he tells me about they were eating watermelons at Christmas. Now I see my answer. And I asked him, when were they buried? And he said they were buried when the watermelons were ripe in the midsummer. They pulled them out at Christmas. And because you have people that raise watermelons have a lot of watermelons, they don't eat the part where all the seeds are. They open it up, they take the center, knock all the seeds off, and that is called boneless ham. Watermelons need a lot of space. In my daughter's house, she's going to have space. She won't like it because she won't be able to mow that spot, but I believe she can produce something there. Now, watermelon, the seedless watermelon is called triploid. And if you plant the triploid seedless watermelon seeds, you need a pollinator, and that is going to be the diploid plant that has seeds. So diploid is seeded. So you need that as a pollinator for the triploid. Now, there is a bacteria fruit blotch out there, and a lot of catalogs will require that you fill this form out in order to buy them. So I made a phone call. What I was told is if you buy a pound or more seeds, you have to fill out this paperwork. And it's because of the spread of this particular bacteria. It can be seed-borne, or it can be moved by your equipment from fields to fields. Now, wonder what this lady's thinking. Is she trying to water that watermelon? Is she trying to figure out, is it ready? Okay, pumpkin. You need a pH of 5 to 7. We're going to fertilize that 100 square foot. We're going to plant at the right temperature, and we're going to give it plenty of room to grow. True pumpkins have angular, tough skins. And then you hear people say that a pumpkin is nothing but a squash. Okay, the squash have round, tender stems. When it comes to pumpkins, they have some small pumpkins, and a lot of them are called like New England pie and Connecticut field pumpkin, that are very small pumpkins and may only weigh a few pounds, but they are the true pumpkin type that you'd want to make a pie out of because there are no fibers in there. You don't have to run it through a blender. They're smooth, orange, and no fiber. So that makes that pumpkin pie. Okay. There used to be a place upon about 14th and Boulevard in Galveston called Rodney's. It was like a steakhouse and a restaurant. But anyhow, they had what they call pumpkin seed salad. And I actually planted some of those seeds eventually, called Lady Godiva. Lady Godiva seeds, the seeds are what they call naked. There's no hull on them. You can pull those out and roast them, and they're good snacks. When you harvest them, when you harvest that plant, you want to go ahead and take the seeds out and take care of them, because those seeds, if left in that shell for a long period of time, will go ahead and sprout inside of the pumpkin. It has yellow with pale green stripes, 6 to 12 pounds. I've also raised the Blue Hubbard, which is more of a squash than a pumpkin, 12 to 18 pounds, okay? Used to, when I had, my garden was probably over an acre, I did a lot of things. Now, pumpkin pies are small with no fiber. This is a green striped cushaw, which I know a man in Santa Fe that used to raise a lot of these, and a lot of these went to Galveston because they were consumed there. I don't think the flavor to me is as good as the pumpkin. It doesn't have the color either, but they have their place on the table, and people will hollow them out, fill them full of meat or whatever, and bake them just like that. And they grow real easy. I've seen one master gardener down in the Archer actually grow that on a fence, but it was supported. And then we have just gourds. Okay, a pH of 5 to 7. We're going to fertilize them some. We're going to plant them, and we're going to give them plenty of room. The small varieties require about 10 square feet. The larger varieties about 30 square feet per plant. Each plant will probably produce 2 to 3 fruit per plant. So we're going to grow them on a fence and give them plenty of room. It's going to take them 100 to 140 days to harvest. That means probably 90 days to grow, 40, 50 days for everything to dry inside, so that when you shake it and you hear those seeds rattle, you know it's dry in time. Now, in order to plant some of these, you take the seeds and you clip the side of the seed so that the moisture will get in there and germinate the seeds. Because if you don't, it may take a month or two before they actually germinate. Okay. The gourds, people build bird houses out of them. A lot of people do gourd painting, okay, especially some of your senior programs and some of your colleges. You can make water dippers or use them for different household use, decorations, or even yard art. Now, here, this one on the top left was at my sister's house. Looked like an apple, beautiful, okay? And then she had the bird nest gourds here. These were on the fence. And this, I believe, one of these is the loofah, which is the dish rag gourd that some people will raise. And what you do is you take that after you harvest it, just put it in water or some water, and everything will wash off except the dish rag inside or the fibers inside. Okay, I'm just about through, and here's the history. The cucumbers, watermelon, and cantaloupe are originally from the old world, primarily African and Asian. Squash, pumpkin, and gourds, primarily from Central and South America. And all of what I've talked about have problem with the root knot nematode. And what I'm going to go over is how to distinguish or determine which is which. On the left is clover, that is a legume. And if the rhizobia is in the soil, at these nodules, they can produce nitrogen in the ground so that the plants can use it after that or next year. These separate from the stem very easy. They pop away. This right here is a bean or a cucumber. And if you look right here where the stem comes down and you have that little round thing, the skin of the root actually grows around it, okay? It cannot be separated from the root unless you just cut it away, okay? But this is the root knot nematode. This is what we don't want. This is the one that when your plants are out there and they look good one day and then all of a sudden they look like they're wilted and they shouldn't be wilted, and you water them and it doesn't help. Look at the roots on these. The roots, this root knot nematode grows very fast in the summer, but in the cool time, when the soil's cool, they don't grow quite as fast, okay? They can be controlled, but you may never totally get rid of them, and there are different methods to attempting to control them. I also understand that a lot of good compost helps control them also. The last slide, okay? In this container, it's the 6th of June. This was a photo op. In there are pickles. This is the Calypso, which is a hybrid pickle. Now over here we have a zucchini squash, the black zucchini, because the daughter loves zucchini. And over here is my Midas 2 yellow squash. And you notice the color? Nice, creamy, smooth. Now, with saying that, I am through, and I'm sure there are some questions out there, and we'll do what we can to answer them. Thank you.